All right, today we're going to go into chapter 18. I'm skipping around in the next few weeks. Today we'll be on 18, and then we're going to do a few in 23 and 25, I believe, after that. So chapter 18 is about viruses and prokaryotes. Everybody see the screen in the slideshow? So 18.1, studying viruses and prokaryotes. The key concept is that infections can be caused in several ways. This is a picture of the esophagus. It's the tube that sends food down to your stomach. And there's bacteria lining the esophagus. That's what you see in the purple and red on here. So you might think that, that's bad. Usually we think of bacteria as bad and harmful, but not all bacteria is. There's a lot of bacteria that is useful for our body. Bacteria in the intestine makes vitamins for us, especially vitamin K, which is important for blood clotting. Bacteria in your esophagus, they actually prevent cancer from occurring in the esophagus. They emit a toxin that kills viruses that can cause cancer. And bacteria in your skin work in a similar way. They secrete an acid, which keeps bacteria that are harmful and viruses from getting into your body. So while some bacteria are infectious and they cause disease, others prevent disease. Now, a virus is different from bacteria. While bacteria is a living cell, a virus is not a living thing. A virus is an infectious particle. It's made only of a strand of RNA or DNA surrounded by a protein coat. So what you're seeing on here in this picture, the yellow and the red, that's the protein coat that surrounds the RNA or DNA in the virus. And then the pink spiral you're seeing on here, that's RNA. And so viruses can be either containing RNA or DNA, depends on the kind of virus. These are different kinds of viruses. HIV causes AIDS, hepatitis B, Ebola, influenza, which causes the flu, rabies, herpes, papillomavirus, which causes warts, bacteriophage, which just attacks bacteria. And so you can see that they're a wide variety of shapes. They're all made of a protein, which is what creates the shape. And they're kind of like machines. They work like machines. And inside the protein, they have either DNA or RNA. So viruses can respond to the environment. They're like machines. So they're not living things. They don't have a brain. They can't think. But just like machines can respond to things, viruses can as well. They can work like machines and they can move and inject things into cells. Viruses have genes. They carry either DNA or RNA, and they can reproduce. But they can't reproduce on their own. They need to have a host cell to reproduce. And so because a virus on its own can't make more of its own kind, it has to infect a host cell to make more of itself. They're not considered living creatures. Now they come from living things though. Viruses originate from either an animal or a human. That's where they get the DNA or RNA from. But when they detach from the human or the animal, they're not a living thing anymore. They're just a piece of DNA or RNA and then protein around that DNA RNA strand. So you can see on here a virus in comparison to a bacteria cell. So the purple is bacteria, prokaryotic cells are bacteria cells. And then a eukaryotic cell, which is the cells that we have, plants and animals have, you can see how much larger that cell is compared to a virus. So a virus is almost 10,000 times smaller than our body cells. But even smaller than a virus is a viroid. So a viroid is an infectious particle that can cause disease in plants. So a viroid is made of a single strand of RNA without a protein coat. So while a virus has a protein coat and looks like kind of like a machine, for a viroid, it's just a single strand of RNA. Okay, moving on to bacteria. They're the ones in purple on here. Bacteria are single-celled microorganisms that can cause infection. So unlike a virus, bacteria are living things. They're single-cell organisms, and they can reproduce on their own. They don't need a host cell to reproduce. Antibiotics can kill bacteria. So if you have an infection that's bacterial, antibiotics can help to treat that infection, but they don't work on viruses. So if you have, the cold or a flu, you're not able to take antibiotics for that because the cold or the flu are made from viruses which don't respond to antibiotics. So both bacteria and viruses are called pathogens. A pathogen is anything that causes disease. It's any disease-causing agent. And in fact, anything in this picture is a pathogen, whether it's a virus, a viroid, prokaryotic cell, or a prion, which I haven't got to yet, but all these are pathogens. They all can cause disease, either in humans or animals or plants. Okay, the other thing on that diagram was a prion. And a prion is made only of proteins. What a prion does is it causes other proteins in the body to start to misfold. And when that happens, they can't work anymore. So a prion has no DNA, no RNA. All it has is just protein. But based on the misshapen protein, it's able, like a domino, to just make all the other protein around it unravel. And it creates damage in the body. It usually attacks the brain. And it's almost always where you find a prion if you have an infection. So just like a virus, it's not a living thing. It's made of a chemical, a protein. It has no RNA, no DNA. Nothing about it is living, but it can still cause disease in living creatures. It's even harder to treat than a virus because it's just a chemical. So you can't take antibiotics for it. You can't kill it. It's not alive to begin with. So it's very hard to treat. At this point, if you have a prion, we don't have any treatment for that. We don't have any medicine you can take because you can't kill it. You can't find it. It's too small. And so it's always fatal when you have a prion disease. There's nothing that a doctor can do to find it, to take it out, or to destroy it. Now, sometimes prions can take years for them to develop, though. So you might have an infection of a prion and not know for 10 years, and it's not going to take effect for 10 years. Now, thankfully, though, these are incredibly rare. We don't have any cases over here in the United States. It's generally when cases with people who have eaten brains of animals. That's generally how they get prions, is through eating brains. So they've taken, of course, steps when they butcher animals to make sure that no brain parts get into the meat. So we can be pretty safe over here and be pretty confident that you won't have a prion infection because that's usually where it originates from. So one infection from a prion is Creutzfeldt-Jakob. So we can see on here that a normal protein looks like this, but a prion is misshapen and the protein looks like this. You don't need to write this down. It's just for your information. So don't worry about writing down what you see on here. And so when you have this infection, this protein right here goes to the brain and attacks the brain and starts to make the protein around the brain cells start to just crumble. And as they start to crumble, the brain shrinks. And that will cause brain dysfunction, memory loss, difficulty moving, speaking. And usually 1 year after, it's almost always fatal at that point. And you can see on here the difference between a healthy brain and a brain that has Creutzfeldt-Jakob. And so the protein, as you can see, just makes all of the other protein in the brain just start to crumble and shrivel up. So it's really gross. It's scary, but again, just remember that it's incredibly rare. We don't have cases over here of this. It's been contained, and it's found mostly in cows. Mad cow disease is a prion. And it was transferred to humans when somebody ate part of a cow brain. But again, they're very safe about making sure that the brains don't transfer to meat that we eat. And so we don't need to worry about this happening for us, but something to be aware of and to understand. That's it for 18.1. It's a pretty short chapter section. Are there any questions about that before we go on? Okay. So today, I wanted to assign 2 things for you to do. On page 511, I want you to work on 1 through 5. And then go on to the next page, data analysis. And I want you to just do questions 4 and 5 on page 512. So on page 511, do 1 through 5, and then go on to the next page and just do 4 and 5 on page 512.
Miss Holly,
Yes.
for number 3, it says 2 reasons why it might have come in the 1890s. I know one of them is like maybe it was like nobody like ate any animal brains or something like that. But what would the other one be?
Well, they take a while to form, so you might have an infection in your body and it doesn't really show for maybe 10, 15 years. So it's hard to make the connection between, eating, say, a brain and then being sick from that, because you got sick maybe 10 years later after that. So they didn't realize that's what it was. So that's one thing you could say. They're also very, very small. And because they're so small, you can't see them with a microscope or any kind of thing that we have. So we need to use advanced equipment to understand them as well. So that's something else you could say too.
Thank you.
You're welcome. One thing I forgot to mention, I think, viroids infect plants. And that's pretty much all they infect. So if they're talking about something that infects a plant, it's going to be a viroid most likely.